my automatic rifle that's sold in America.
58% of American voters believe that gun control laws would do little or nothing to reduce mass shootings in our country. Only a scant 21% of voters think gun control laws would help a lot. There's a reason not even the most extreme progressive leftist politician has ever dared to suggest repealing our Second Amendment or banning guns. Our politicians represent we the people, and we the people overwhelmingly support and value our right to bear arms. It is our protection against insane, evil people who try to harm us and against a government that tends towards tyranny. It is not a privilege that can be voted away, but a right guaranteed to be protected by our Constitution. NRA spokeswoman Dana Loesch did last night what no cowardly liberal would ever have the courage to do. She faced her opponents. She quite literally walked into the lion's den willingly, with compassion and poise, armed with facts and history. She fielded questions from people who called her names nastier than they call the killer who actually murdered the 17 people in Parkland. In response to the NRA's willingness to have a conversation with anti-gun activists, these same activists swarmed Dana Loesch as she exited the building, yelling, "Burn her." And they wonder why we won't give them our firearms? Joining me now, gun policy advocate Matt Larosiere. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Matt, there were a lot of chilling moments during this town hall event on CNN last night, but perhaps the most chilling of all was what Dana Loesch reported as she left the building, that she would not have gotten out of that building safely had she not had an armed security detail, and that this mob of activists were yelling, "Burn her."
Well, yeah, I mean, mob rule is exactly what the Constitution protects us against, and it seems that these people aren't too interested in the Constitution one way or the other.
Right, and it's unbelievable to me that they want us to turn over our guns to them when this is how they behave. This town hall was a setup from the beginning. I give tremendous kudos to Dana Loesch for being willing to face this mob. It was not a representation of the majority of the American people. It wasn't even a representation of the American people. These were just people who were ferociously opposed to our Second Amendment rights. The questions that were asked reportedly were scripted. The one student who has been speaking out about wanting armed security, the student who said if Coach Aaron Feist had been armed, he would have been able to thwart this threat. He was told he couldn't ask the question about armed security, about hiring veterans as security guards. He said CNN gave him a scripted question instead. Matt, it's unbelievable to me.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't tend to expect much more from CNN on this specific issue. The questions that I saw asked were repetitive and generally didn't cover any issue. What I want to know is, are these people concerned about saving lives, or do they just hate guns? It really seems more like the latter.
It does seem like the latter. We heard, I played the clip, Marco Rubio was talking about why he didn't support a ban on AR-15s, on that particular type of semi-automatic rifle, and he said, well, that leads down the slope of banning all semi-automatic rifles and then all semi-automatic weapons, which is the majority of weapons in our country. The crowd cheered. This might be the first time that we have seen gun control activists openly express their desire to ban all guns. That might be the turning point in the gun debate in our country.
Well, it's certainly changed a lot. It is interesting, back in the 50s, more than 60% of people supported banning all handguns. And then as people started learning more, as stuff got more obvious, as we actually passed gun laws, the earliest gun laws, the bans on Saturday Night Special, all they served to do was increase lethality, because the next cheapest gun became the Browning High Power. You know,
right.
Substitution is a real thing, and people want to ignore that.
They do. They want to ignore the facts. They want to ignore our history. They don't look at what happens when we've tried banning guns in our nation. It doesn't work. All right, Matt, I want to turn to the political response here. And this is politicians such as Senator Rubio, Senator Nelson, and President Trump. The two senators were at this town hall last night. President Trump hosted earlier in the day a listening session with children and parents who were there in Parkland, Florida, as well as family members of the people killed in Columbine and Sandy Hook. Let's start with Senator Rubio. It seemed to me that he caved to this pressure. I don't know a nicer way to put this. He said he will now reconsider his support for high-capacity magazines, as if the magazine itself is responsible for the death. He said he'd be willing to raise the age to purchase a firearm to 21. Matt, I don't think that's the solution.
What's really shocking to me here is that the argument that these are weapons of war and designed for killing is somehow gaining traction. It's what separates a weapon from a houseplant. This isn't part of the discussion. Yes, weapons are designed to kill. That shouldn't be a shocking revelation. You know, this shouldn't be the core of our discussion. We were aware what weapons were designed for when we passed the Second Amendment. We were, again, aware of it when we passed the 14th Amendment that bound the Second Amendment against the states. And by the way, by the time we passed the 14th Amendment, self-loading weapons that had large capacity magazines, according to many state law definitions, already existed and in fact were quite popular.
Right. That doesn't make any difference to liberals because they don't study the facts. They don't look at the numbers. They don't look at what we know happens. An argument that I have seen 100 times just today, especially on Twitter, is how do we know what would happen? How do we know the results of gun control if we've never tried it? We have tried it. We have tried it. And it doesn't work. Talk to me a little bit about President Trump's suggestion. He said that he would like to empower teachers to conceal carry. Now, that doesn't mean giving a gun to all teachers. That means, he says, approximately 20% of teachers would be willing and able. They would have the capacity to conceal carry firearms in the classroom and keep students safe. This has been something that I have been advocating for, something I think would prevent these mass shootings, would mitigate them if they were tried. It would also serve as a deterrent. Why are liberals so opposed to this?
Because they're not actually interested in saving lives, it seems. It seems that what people, or what the liberals, the progressives, want in this question is to ban guns. They're not interested in solutions. They're only cheering for things like an assault weapon ban, which we had, and it was completely ineffective. It was a total wash, no effect. They're interested in doing that again. They don't care about the background check system. They don't care about enforcing the laws that we already have on the books, laws which are actually incredibly restrictive. You can be thrown in jail for making simple mistakes with a firearm for many, many years, but we're not willing to talk about this. We're not willing to talk about the 150 years of compromises that we've already made on the Second Amendment. To progressives, it seems that 150 years of compromise is nothing, and that's what's being repeated again and again, and I find that very odd.
I do. Well, I find it very telling. Like I said, I think that we saw, maybe for the first time, how open progressives are about wanting to ban all firearms. This isn't about quote-unquote common sense gun control legislation anymore. They want to take away firearms. It's what conservatives have been saying all the time. If we really were looking for a solution, and by we, I mean people on the left and people on the right, we would sit down and we would talk about how the FBI let this slip, how law enforcement visited the shooter 39 times, how the school and students at the school who reported it to authorities were subject to death threats from this student, and how he was still able to walk free and obtain a firearm because he should not have had a firearm. Matt, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate your analysis.